Hi everyone, my name's Kev, welcome back to KG Graves. We're still in the USA in New Hampshire, in Concord, the capital, and we're here to visit the 14th US President, Franklin Pierce, and his wife. More information coming up about Franklin now.
On January 6, 1853, a bitterly cold day in New England, a steam train pulling a single passenger car left the Andover, Massachusetts station bound for Concord, New Hampshire. There were several passengers in the car, among them the President-elect of the United States, Franklin Pierce, his wife Jane, and their 11-year-old son, Benny. The Pierces were returning from seeing friends in Amherst over the holidays. We're not sure exactly what happened to the train, but some kind of accident caused it to derail. The passenger car tumbled down an embankment and landed on its roof. It happened pretty much right here on this stretch of track, though the terrain has undoubtedly changed since 1853. The president-elect and his wife weren't badly hurt, but as the train crashed, a piece of metal struck Benny in the forehead. It literally sheared off the back of his skull.
Franklin Pierce was born on the 23rd of November 1804 in Hillsborough, New Hampshire, USA, to parents Benjamin and Anna (nee Kendrick). He was the 14th US President. He was a sixth-generation descendant of Thomas Pierce, who had moved to the Massachusetts Bay Colony from Norwich, Norfolk, England in around 1634. He was the fifth of 8 children. His father's first wife, Elizabeth Andrews, died in childbirth, leaving a daughter. Franklin's father placed him in a school at the Hillsborough Centre in childhood and sent him to the town school in Hancock, the Hancock Academy, at age 12. Not fond of schooling, he grew homesick, and one Sunday he walked 12 miles back to his home. His father fed him dinner and drove him part of the way back to school before ordering him to walk the rest of the way in a thunderstorm. Franklin later cited this moment as the turning point in my life. Later that year, he transferred to Phillips Exeter Academy to prepare for college. By this time, he had built up a reputation as a charming student, sometimes prone to misbehavior. In 1820, Franklin entered Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine, one of 19 freshmen. He was the last in his class after 2 years, but he worked hard to improve his grades and graduated in 5th place in 1824 in a graduating class of 14. During his final years at Bowdoin, he spent several months teaching at Hebron Academy in rural Hebron, Maine, where he earned his first salary. Franklin read law briefly with former New Hampshire Governor Levi Woodbury, a family friend. He was admitted to the New Hampshire bar in late 1827 and began to practice in Hillsborough. He lost his first case but soon proved capable as a lawyer. While the younger Franklin had set out to build a career as an attorney, he was fully drawn into the realm of politics as the 1828 presidential election between John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson approached. In the state elections held in March 1828, Franklin won his first election, a 1-year term as Hillsborough's town meeting moderator, a position which he was re-elected 5 times. Franklin was appointed as chairman of the House Education Committee in 1829 and the Committee on Towns the following year. By 1831, Democrats held a legislative majority and he was elected Speaker of the House. On the 19th of November 1834, he married Jane Means Appleton. She was somewhat gaunt and constantly ill from tuberculosis and psychological ailments. She abhorred politics and especially disliked Washington, D.C., creating a tension that would continue throughout Franklin's political ascent. Jane disliked Hillsborough as well, and in 1838 the Pierces relocated to the state capital Concord, New Hampshire. They had 3 sons, all of whom died in childhood. Franklin Jr., the 2nd to the 5th of February 1836, died in infancy, while Frank Robert, 27th of August 1839 to the 14th of November 1843, died at the age of 4 from the typhus epidemic. Benjamin, 13th of April 1841 to the 6th of January 1853, died at the age of 11 in a train accident. More on that later. Franklin departed in November 1833 for Washington, D.C., where the 23rd United States Congress convened its regular session on the 2nd of December. His first term was fairly uneventful from a legislative standpoint, and he was easily re-elected in March 1835. When not in Washington, he attended to his law practice, and in December 1835 returned to the capital for the 24th Congress. In the mid-1830s, Congress was inundated with petitions from anti-slavery groups seeking legislation to restrict slavery in the United States. Franklin said, "I consider slavery a social and political evil, and most sincerely wish that it had no existence upon the face of the earth." Franklin was elected to the Senate full term to commence in March 1837, and at age 32 was at the time one of the youngest members in Senate history. The election came at a difficult time for him, as his father, sister and brother were all seriously ill, while his wife also continued to suffer from chronic poor health. He entered the Senate at the time of economic crisis. He considered the Depression a result of the banking system's rapid growth amidst the extravagance of overtrading and the wilderness of speculation. One topic of particular importance to Franklin was the military. He took an interest in military pensions, seeing abundant fraud within the system, and was named chairman of the Senate Committee on the Military Pensions in the 26th Congress. In that capacity, he urged the modernization and expansion of the army. In December 1841, he decided to resign from Congress, something he had been planning for some time. Also, he was frustrated at being a member of the legislative minority and wished to devote his time to his family and law practice. His last actions in the Senate in February 1842 were to oppose a bill distributing federal funds to the states, believing that the money should go to the military instead. Despite his resignation from the Senate, Franklin had no intention of leaving public life. The move to Concord had given him more opportunities for cases and allowed Jane Pierce a more robust community life. Jane had remained in Concord with her young son Frank and her newborn Benjamin for the latter part of his Senate term, and this separation had taken a toll on the family. Franklin, meanwhile, had begun a demanding but lucrative law partnership with Asa Fowler during congressional recesses. Franklin returned to Concord in early 1842, and his reputation as a lawyer continued to flourish. Known for his gracious personality, eloquence, and excellent memory, he attracted large audiences in court. He would often represent poor people for little or no compensation. In June 1842, he was named chairman of the State Democratic Committee. His priorities were order, modernization, compromise, and party unity, which he tried to place ahead of his personal views on political issues. Active military service was a long-held dream for Franklin, so when Congress declared war against Mexico in May 1846, he immediately volunteered to join. Congress passed a bill authorizing the creation of 10 regiments, and Franklin was appointed commander and colonel of the 9th Infantry Regiment in February 1847. On the 3rd of March 1847, Franklin was promoted to Brigadier General and took command of a brigade of reinforcements for General Winfield Scott's army. He reached the already seized port of Vera Cruz in late June, where he prepared a march of 2,500 men accompanying supplies for Scott. The 3-week journey inland was perilous, and the men fought off several attacks before joining with Scott's army in early August, in time for the Battle of Contreras. The battle was disastrous for Franklin. His horse was suddenly startled during the charge, knocking him groin first against his saddle. The horse then tripped into a crevice and fell, pinning Franklin underneath and debilitating his knee. The incident made it look like he had fainted, causing one soldier to call for someone else to take command, saying, "General Pierce is a damn coward." He returned for the following day's action, but injured his knee again, forcing him to hobble after his men. By the time he caught up, the battle was mostly won. As the battle continued, Scott ordered Franklin to the rear to convalesce. He responded, "For God's sake, General, this is the last great battle, and I must lead my brigade." Scott yielded, and Franklin entered the fight, tied to his saddle, but the pain in his leg became so great that he passed out on the field. The Americans won the battle, and Franklin helped negotiate an armistice. He then returned to command and led his brigade throughout the rest of the campaign, eventually taking part in the capture of Mexico City in mid-September, although his brigade was held in reserve for much of the battle. Franklin was finally allowed to return to Concord in late December 1847. He was given a hero's welcome in his home state and submitted his resignation from the army, which was approved on the 20th of March 1848. His military exploits elevated his popularity in New Hampshire, but his injuries and subsequent troubles in battle led to accusations of cowardice that would long shadow him. Returning to Concord, Franklin resumed his law practice. In the 1852 presidential elections, Franklin entered the race but had a difficult time and kept a low profile while he was being nominated. On the 49th ballot, he received all but 6 of the votes, gaining the nomination. Delegates selected Alabama Senator William R. King as his running mate. When word reached New Hampshire of the result, Franklin found it difficult to believe, and his wife fainted. The Whig nominee was General Scott, Franklin's commander in Mexico. The lack of political differences reduced the campaign to a bitter personality contest and helped to dampen voter turnout to its lowest level since 1836. Franklin kept quiet so as not to upset his party's delicate unity and allowed his allies to run the campaign. Scott won only Kentucky, Tennessee, Massachusetts and Vermont, finishing with 42 electoral votes to Franklin's 254. With 3.2 million votes cast, he won the popular vote 50.9% to 44.1%. Franklin began his presidency in mourning. Weeks after his election, on the 6th of January 1853, he and his family were travelling from Boston by train when their car derailed and rolled down an embankment near Andover, Massachusetts. Both Franklin and Jane Pierce survived, but their only remaining son, 11-year-old Benjamin, was crushed to death in the wreckage, his body nearly decapitated. Franklin was not able to hide the gruesome sight from his wife. They both suffered severe depression afterward, which likely affected his performance as president. Jane Pierce wondered whether the accident was divine punishment for her husband's pursuit and acceptance of high office. She wrote a lengthy letter of apology to Benny for her failings as a mother. She avoided social functions for much of her first 2 years as First Lady, making her public debut in that role to great sympathy at the annual public reception held at the White House on New Year's Day 1855. When Franklin departed New Hampshire for the inauguration, Jane chose not to accompany him. Franklin, then the youngest man to be elected president, chose to affirm his oath of office on a law book rather than a Bible, as all his predecessors except John Quincy Adams, see the one-on-one video 100, who swore on a book of law, had done. He was the first president to deliver his inaugural address from memory. The Senate unanimously and immediately confirmed all of his cabinet nominations. Franklin spent the first few weeks of his term sorting through hundreds of lower-level federal positions to be filled. Franklin and his running mate King had not communicated since they had been selected candidates in June 1852. By the start of 1853, King was severely ill with tuberculosis and went to Cuba to recuperate. His condition deteriorated and Congress passed a special law allowing him to be sworn in before the American consul in Havana on the 24th of March. Wanting to die at home, he returned to his plantation in Alabama on the 17th of April and died the next day. The office of Vice President remained vacant for the remainder of Franklin's term, as the Constitution then had no provision for filling the vacancy. Franklin sought to run a more efficient and accountable government than his predecessors. One of his reforms was to expand the role of the U.S. Attorney General in appointing federal judges and attorneys, an important step in the eventual development of the Justice Department. Franklin's Secretary of War, Jefferson Davis, deployed the Army Corps of Engineers to supervise construction projects in the District of Columbia, including the expansion of the United States Capitol and building of the Washington Monument. In the 1856 election, Franklin fully expected to be re-nominated by the Democrats. In reality, his chances of winning the nomination, let alone the general election, were slim. Balloting began on the 5th of June with two opponents. He eventually lost to James Buchanan, who got the 2/3 of the votes required. Franklin made his final message to Congress in December 1856, and his cabinet left office on the 4th of March 1857, the only time in US history that the original cabinet members all remained for a full 4-year term. After leaving the White House, the Pierces remained in Washington for more than 2 months, and eventually moved to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where Franklin had begun to speculate in property. Seeking warmer weather, he and Jane spent the next 3 years travelling, beginning with a stay in Madeira and followed by tours of Europe and the Bahamas. As civil war broke out in the 1860s, Franklin got involved to try and prevent the war without success. His drinking impaired his health in his last years, and he grew increasingly spiritual. He had a brief relationship with an unknown woman in mid-1865. On the second anniversary of Jane's death, he was baptized into his wife's faith at St. Paul's Church in Concord. He took up the life of an old farmer, as he called himself, buying up property, drinking less, farming the land himself and hosting visiting relatives. He spent most of his time in Concord at his cottage at Little Boar's Head on the coast, sometimes visiting Jane's relatives in Massachusetts. Franklin's health began to decline again in mid-1869. He resumed heavy drinking despite his deteriorating physical condition. He returned to Concord that September, suffering from severe cirrhosis of the liver, knowing he would not recover. A caretaker was hired. None of his family members were present in his final days. He died at 4:35 a.m. on Friday the 8th of October 1869 at the age of 64. President Grant, who later defended his service in the Mexican-American War, declared a day of national mourning. The Franklin Pierce house in Concord, where he died, was destroyed by fire in 1981, but is nevertheless still listed on the register. The statue of Franklin, dedicated in 1914, stands on the grounds of the New Hampshire State House. Franklin's image has been used on a US postage stamp 1938 and a presidential dollar coin 2010. Let's see where his grave is located. So there you have it, the final resting place of Franklin Pierce, the 14th US President. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one. Rest in peace, Franklin Pierce.